Return to your homes, and you will not be harmed.
Imagine what the colonists of Lexington, Massachusetts were up against. In the early morning hours of April 19, 1775, 700 British redcoats were marching their way. Only about 77 colonial militia, known as the Minutemen, were waiting with muskets in hand to defend their families and town. Minuteman and Captain John Parker, whose statue proudly looks over the battle green here at Lexington, told his troops on that fateful day, "Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." And indeed, it did. The famous shot that was heard around the world rang out here on this Lexington battle green. To this day, nobody knows which side fired first, but the war was on.
We were up against one of the most powerful nations in the world, certainly the superpower of Europe. We had no munition plants, we had no uniforms, we had no supplies, we had no navy, we had no real army. And to think of taking this nation on and ever thinking that we had a chance of winning was nothing short of, it was a miracle.
Nearly all the Minutemen were Christians, parishioners of the town's only church, pastored by the Reverend Jonas Clark, who himself was known as a great patriot and often preached revolution from the pulpit. The minister was also often the one in charge of organizing the town's militia, as every town was required by law to have a militia that was trained and ready to fight if necessary.
The ministers were were often the only educated people in town. They had a captive audience once a week. And it was the only time everyone got together. And so if the minister was of a mind to use the pulpit to try to influence people along to the patriot point of view, they would look to him.
We're all familiar with Paul Revere's famous midnight ride. Well, this is where he showed up, at the home of the Reverend Jonas Clark, to warn him and his two prominent guests, John Hancock and Sam Adams, that the British were indeed coming.
Well, the fact was the British were coming, but they were walking. So it's going to take, they're 15 miles away. So Parker basically says to everyone, look, go home, but be within the sound of the drum.
When the battle at Lexington was over, 2 British soldiers were injured and 8 Minutemen were dead. Their bodies are buried here on the green underneath this monument. And the words on this monument could not be more patriotic. It says, on April 19th, 1775, the die was cast. The blood of these martyrs in the cause of God and their country was the cement of the union of these states, then colonies. It goes on to say that they nobly dared to be free, and the peace, liberty, and independence of the United States of America was their glorious reward.
They realized that the British had abused their authority and really enslaved the colonists. And they knew that they didn't fight the oppressors, no one else would.
There were many other influential clergy involved in the Revolutionary War, including Lutheran Reverend John Peter Muhlenberg of Woodstock, Virginia. Before marching off to join George Washington's army at Washington's request, Muhlenberg delivered a powerful sermon from Ecclesiastes 3:1-8 that concluded with these words. The Bible tells us there is a time for all things, and there is a time to preach and a time to pray. But the time for me to preach has passed away, and there is a time to fight. And that time has come now. Now is the time to fight.
With that, he took off his robe to reveal the uniform of a Virginia colonel. He then took his musket from behind the pulpit, put on his colonel's hat, and marched off to lead his men to war.
Throughout the war, sustaining morale was a real struggle at home. Very often, the ministers were the ones who were looked to for that purpose. The Reverend Nathaniel Whitaker of Salem, Massachusetts, was one such man. A so-called New Light Presbyterian pastor, he played a significant role in helping to encourage privateering, the means by which Americans were able to gain war material when they didn't have factories.
They would capture British merchant vessels on the high seas and bring those goods home. He was instrumental in getting that business up and running. He also was instrumental in putting together a gunpowder manufacturing in Salem to help support the war effort.
The clergy were so influential in the war effort, the British and those loyal to the crown referred to them as the Black Regiment because they wore black robes.
The king was afraid of the ministers because they refused to acknowledge the divine authority of the king. Their battle cry was, "No king but King Jesus."
Some go as far as to say if it were not for the churches and pastors of colonial America, our land would be a British colony today.
The British governor of Massachusetts made the statement before the revolution started that if the ministers ever came out in force to support the revolution, that the British would lose.
Today, many scholars admit the role of clergy and Christians is downplayed in our nation's textbooks.
We're supposed to ignore and pretend that the Christian foundation of this nation never existed. And I believe that it's our responsibility as Christians to make sure that our children are raised knowing that this was, and always will be a Christian nation.
Wendy Griffith, CBN News, Lexington, Massachusetts.